I pulled up the driveway at 11:30 p.m., the tires crunching softly on the gravel. The corporate event had gone better than expected. I shook more hands, drank less scotch, and made a deal that would probably add another few zeros to the company's bottom line. My phone buzzed with a congratulations text from one of the board members, but I didn't bother replying. All I wanted now was to slip into bed next to my wife, Emily, and call it a night. The house was unusually quiet for this hour. Normally, Emily would be in the living room binge-watching one of those crime documentaries she liked or scrolling through her phone while waiting for me. But tonight, no glow of the TV, no faint hum of background noise. Just darkness and silence, like the house itself was holding its breath. I noticed the front door wasn't locked. Odd, I thought. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender candles lingering in the air. Everything seemed in place. Shoes neatly arranged by the entrance, the coat rack empty except for my jacket from the morning. Maybe she went to bed early. That wasn't like her, but I didn't think much of it. I loosened my tie, kicked off my shoes, and made my way up the stairs, the soft creak of the steps feeling louder than usual in the stillness of the house. As I reached the top, a flicker of light caught my eye. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough for a narrow strip of light to spill into the hallway. My pulse quickened, though I wasn't sure why. I told myself she probably left a lamp on while reading. Emily loved to read before bed, but as I got closer, the sound hit me a low, muffled noise, almost like a stifled laugh. My brain scrambled to rationalize it. Maybe she's watching something on her phone. Maybe she's on a call with a friend. But deep down, a darker thought crept in, uninvited and unwelcome. I reached for the door and pushed it open. There they were, Emily and a man whose face I recognized instantly. Nathan, her Pilates instructor, the guy she had praised endlessly for helping her get back into shape. He wasn't even fully undressed, just shirtless, wearing those ridiculous compression shorts he probably advertised to his clients. Emily, tangled in the sheets, looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her hair was messy, her face flushed, and she immediately pulled the blanket up to cover herself. For a second, I stood there, frozen. My mind couldn't keep up with what my eyes were processing. I expected anger, or maybe even sorrow, to come rushing in. Instead, I laughed, a loud, hysterical laugh that echoed through the room like it belonged to someone who had completely lost it. Nathan scrambled to grab his shirt, fumbling like a guilty teenager sneaking out of a girl's bedroom. Emily stammered something I couldn't make out, her words drowning under the sound of my own manic laughter. I laughed until my sides hurt, until I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Because how could this be real? I was Daniel Harrington, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I had the house, the cars, the lifestyle most people could only dream of. And here was my wife of 7 years, in bed with a man whose biggest achievement was teaching suburban moms how to stretch properly. But the laughter stopped as suddenly as it had started. Reality hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked back down the stairs, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Behind me, I heard Emily calling my name, but I didn't stop. In the living room, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the bar cart, poured a generous amount into a glass, and gulped it down without bothering to sit. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone and, with a few taps, blocked Emily's access to our joint bank accounts. It wasn't even about the money. It was about sending a message. The luxury she was so accustomed to, the security she probably took for granted, gone. I didn't care where she went tonight. She could go to a hotel with Nathan for all I cared. But tomorrow we'd talk. I needed answers. Why him? Why this? What was it that I wasn't giving her? Because right now, none of it made sense. And that, more than anything, was what I couldn't handle. The next morning arrived with a headache splitting my skull in half, courtesy of last night's whiskey. I barely slept. Instead, I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in my head like some sick movie on loop. Emily, Nathan, the sheets, her face when she saw me standing there. That part stuck with me the most. She didn't look guilty. She looked scared. There was a difference, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. By 8 a.m., I was showered, dressed, and sitting in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee. The house felt too big, too quiet, but I knew that wouldn't last. Sure enough, I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. Light, hesitant steps, as if she were afraid that each one would trigger an explosion. Emily appeared in the doorway, wearing the same robe she always wore on lazy Sunday mornings. Her hair was tied back, and there was no makeup on her face. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll you didn't want to touch too hard in case it shattered. But I wasn't in the mood to play gentle. She cleared her throat. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her to sit. I let her stand there, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like a kid caught stealing candy. I sipped my coffee and stared at her over the rim of the cup, giving her nothing but silence. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to work for it. I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that doesn't even begin to cover it, but I need you to know that." I set the cup down slowly, letting the sound of ceramic meeting would fill the air. My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like a blade pressed against skin. "Out of all the people in the world, why a guy whose biggest accomplishment is teaching you how to touch your toes?" She winced, and I saw her fingers tighten around the fabric of her robe. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me. Make it make sense." She hesitated, and I could see the gears turning in her head, searching for the right words. I wasn't sure whether she was trying to tell the truth or just finding a way to soften the blow, but either way, I wasn't feeling generous. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice cracking. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." I barked out a laugh, short, bitter, and devoid of humor. "That's the excuse, huh? It just happened, like you accidentally tripped and fell into bed with him?" "I didn't plan on hurting you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. He was just there. I was feeling disconnected from us, and he made me feel. She stopped herself, biting down on the rest of the sentence like it burned her tongue. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Made you feel what? Important? Desired? Or did you just want attention from someone who didn't know you well enough to see your flaws?" Her face crumpled, and she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. "I wasn't finished, though. Not even close. You want to know what really gets me, Emily? I've worked my ass off to give you this life. The trips, the house, the freedom to pursue whatever you want. And instead of talking to me about whatever was bothering you, you decided to screw the first guy who gave you a compliment." "It wasn't just a compliment," she said, her voice trembling. "It was deeper than that." I clenched my jaw, trying to rein in the wave of anger threatening to boil over. "Deeper," I repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. "Let me guess. He understood you in a way I didn't? Or is this the part where you tell me it wasn't about the sex, that it was about feeling seen?" She sobbed quietly, and for a moment, I thought about getting up, holding her, comforting her the way I had so many times before. But the memory of her in bed with Nathan crushed that thought before it could fully form. I stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the backyard where we used to sit together on lazy afternoons, talking about everything and nothing. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago now, like they belonged to a different couple in a different world. "I blocked your access to the accounts," I said without turning around. "So if you were planning on booking a spa retreat to think things over, you're out of luck." "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice firmer now. "I don't want to leave. I want to fix this." I laughed again, soft this time, almost to myself. "Fix it? You think this is something you can fix with an apology and a few therapy sessions? I'm not giving up on us, Daniel." Her voice had a stubborn edge to it now, like she was clinging to the last piece of solid ground in a storm. "You can hate me right now. You have every right to. But I'm not walking away." I turned to face her, my eyes locking onto hers. "You already walked away. The minute you let him into our bed, you walked away. And now you want me to act like you just took a wrong turn and need directions back?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking like someone who realized too late that they had gambled everything and lost. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket, walked past her, and headed for the door. I needed air. I needed space. And I needed to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. As I stepped outside, the cool morning breeze hit my face, clearing some of the fog in my head. But the questions lingered, swirling like smoke. What did this mean for us? Was there even an us left to save? And if there was, did I even want to? I drove aimlessly for hours, the city blurring past me like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The streets were busy with the usual morning traffic. People heading to work, grabbing coffee, living their lives as if the world hadn't just fallen apart for someone else. I envied them, their normalcy. For once, I wanted to be the guy with nothing more to worry about than getting to the office on time or choosing what sandwich to eat for lunch. Instead, I was the guy whose wife had cheated on him with her Pilates instructor. Eventually, I found myself at a park on the outskirts of town, the kind of place I used to go to when I needed to think. I parked the car, got out, and sat on a bench near the pond, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. Ducks floated lazily across the water, blissfully unaware of the chaos in my head. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos, vacations in Greece, weekend getaways to Napa Valley, Christmas mornings by the tree. Emily's smile was everywhere, lighting up the screen like she had no idea what she'd eventually do to us. Or maybe she did. Maybe the cracks had always been there, and I just hadn't wanted to see them. My phone buzzed. Emily again. I ignored the call and tossed the phone onto the bench beside me. She'd been trying to reach me all morning, leaving voicemail after voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't need to listen to them to know what they said. Please come home. Let's talk. I'm sorry. I was done talking for now. As the sun climbed higher, warming the air just enough to chase away the chill, I tried to piece together how we'd gotten here. Was it the long work hours? The business trips? Had I been so focused on building a future for us that I'd forgotten about the present? Or was this just who she was, and I had been too blind to see it? I thought back to the first time she mentioned Nathan. She had just signed up for Pilates classes, saying she wanted to feel more energized and get back into shape. At the time, I'd encouraged her. Anything that makes you happy, Em. I remembered those words clearly, and they made me sick now. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The sudden attention to her appearance, the extra time spent at the studio, the way she'd started turning her phone screen away from me when I walked into the room. I had chalked it up to privacy, to her wanting space. I trusted her. That trust had been shattered in an instant, like a glass dropped from too high a shelf. By noon, hunger gnawed at me, but I wasn't ready to face the world again. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to check Emily's messages or block her number entirely. Before I could decide, a notification popped up, a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Amanda. Hey, I know it's been a while, but I heard about what happened. You okay? I stared at the message, my mind racing. Amanda. She was my ex from college, the one I thought I'd marry before things fell apart. We hadn't talked in years, not even a casual, "How are you?" on social media. How she had heard about this, I had no clue. But the fact that she reached out now, when I was at my lowest, made me wonder if fate had a twisted sense of humor. Before I could overthink it, I replied, "Could be better. How did you find out?" A mutual friend mentioned it. Thought I'd check in. Want to meet up and talk? Sure. When? I'm free this evening. Let's grab dinner. I agreed, knowing full well that meeting an ex right after discovering your wife's affair was a recipe for disaster. But I didn't care. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't trying to apologize or beg for forgiveness. That evening, I found myself sitting across from Amanda at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. She looked the same, soft brown hair, warm eyes, and that smile that used to make me forget about everything else. For a second, it was like stepping back in time, before careers, marriages, and betrayals. I was surprised to hear from you, I admitted, sipping my wine. I was surprised you responded, she said, her voice gentle. But I'm glad you did. We talked about the past, the things we used to do, the nights we stayed up dreaming about what our future would look like. But eventually, the conversation shifted to the present. So, she said, leaning forward slightly, do you want to talk about it? Or are we pretending this is just a friendly reunion? I chuckled softly. I caught her in bed with her Pilates instructor. Last night, Amanda's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She let me talk, let me unload everything, the shock, the anger, the questions I still didn't have answers to. By the time I finished, I felt like I had just run a marathon. I'm sorry, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You didn't deserve that. No one does. I stared at our hands, her touch both comforting and dangerous. Memories of what we used to be flickered in the back of my mind, tempting me with what-ifs. But I wasn't here for that. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Are you going to take her back? Amanda's question hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette, impossible to ignore. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. But another part still loves her, Amanda finished for me. I nodded, hating myself for it. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. Love isn't always enough, Daniel. Sometimes people do unforgivable things, and it doesn't mean you failed. It just means they weren't who you thought they were. Her words hit harder than I expected. Was that what Emily had become? Someone I no longer recognized? Or was this just a temporary mistake, one we could recover from? As the night wore on, I realized I wasn't just searching for answers about Emily. I was searching for answers about myself. I drove home after dinner, Amanda's words echoing in my head. Love isn't always enough. Simple but heavy. The weight of it pressed against my chest the entire way back. I wasn't sure if meeting her had helped or made things worse. Seeing someone from my past while my present lay in shambles wasn't exactly the cleanest form of therapy, but it had given me one thing: clarity. I wasn't sure if I wanted Emily back. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, as if it, too, had given up. I half expected Emily to be gone, her suitcase missing, maybe a note on the counter saying she couldn't face me anymore. But when I walked in, her shoes were still neatly by the door, and the faint sound of music played from the living room. I found her curled up on the couch, hugging her knees to her chest, a glass of wine sitting untouched on the coffee table. The room smelled like the lavender candles she always lit when she was upset. Her eyes were red and swollen, and for a moment, she looked like a stranger, a broken version of the woman I married. "You're back," she said softly, as if she wasn't sure I would be. "I'm back." I stood by the doorway, not ready to join her on the couch, not ready to pretend we were anywhere close to okay. The air between us was suffocating, filled with words neither of us wanted to say. "I didn't think you'd come home," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the music. "I thought you might stay with a friend or someone else like Amanda." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her head snapped up, confusion flashing across her face. "Amanda?" I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. She texted me. We had dinner. Emily's breath hitched, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She was trying to figure out if this was revenge, if I had gone to Amanda to hurt her the way she had hurt me. "It wasn't like that," I said before she could speak. "She reached out because she heard about us. We talked. That's it." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but the tension didn't leave her eyes. "Did you tell her everything?" "Enough." Silence filled the room again, thick and unbearable. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake her until she told me why she had done this. But instead, I walked over to the armchair across from her and sat down, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I need you to be honest with me. No more half-truths, no more 'it just happened.' I need the whole story." She nodded slowly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Okay." I waited, watching her gather the courage to speak. Whatever she was about to say, I knew it wouldn't be pretty. "It started a few months ago," she began, her voice shaking. "After one of your business trips. You were gone for 2 weeks, and when you came back, it felt like you weren't really here. I know you were busy, and I know you were doing it for us, but—" She stopped, swallowing hard. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to interrupt. She wasn't finished. "Nathan was just supposed to be a distraction," she continued. "Someone who made me feel seen. It wasn't supposed to go beyond that. But then it did, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I told myself it was over, I'd see him at the studio, and it would start all over again." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. She wasn't just apologizing for the affair. She was explaining how it became a habit, a cycle she couldn't break. It didn't make it any easier to hear. "Did you love him?" I asked, my voice cold. She shook her head violently. "No, it wasn't love. It was an escape from the pressure of being perfect, from feeling like I had to keep up with you, with your world. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Her words were stabbing at old wounds I didn't even know I had. Pressure, distance, feeling invisible. Was that my fault? Had I created an environment where she felt like she couldn't talk to me? No. I refused to carry that blame. She could have come to me. She could have said something, anything before it got to this point. What happens now, Emily? I asked, finally meeting her gaze. What do you expect me to do with all of this? She wiped another tear away and took a deep breath. I don't know, she whispered. I just not want to fix it. I want us to be okay again. I laughed bitterly. You keep saying that like it's a switch we can flip. Like all I have to do is wake up tomorrow and pretend none of this happened. I'm not asking you to forget, she said, her voice gaining strength. I know I broke us, but I believe we can rebuild, even if it takes time. I didn't respond. Instead, I got up, walked over to the window, and stared out into the night. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, and for a moment, it reminded me of how distant we had become. Two people sharing the same space but living in different worlds. I'm staying in the guest room tonight, I said, not bothering to turn around. I need time to think. She didn't argue. I heard her stand, her footsteps retreating down the hall, and then the soft click of the bedroom door closing behind her. I stayed by the window for a long time, watching the darkness outside, wondering if the light could ever find its way back in. The next morning arrived too soon, dragging the weight of yesterday with it. I didn't wake up refreshed. I woke up restless, my mind running circles around everything Emily had said. The guest room bed was stiff and unfamiliar, a reflection of the cold distance between us now. As I rubbed my eyes and sat up, I realized something. Emily hadn't just broken us. She had broken me. By the time I made it downstairs, the smell of coffee wafted through the kitchen. She was there, sitting at the table, a cup between her hands. She looked like she hadn't slept either, her eyes rimmed with dark circles and her hair tied back in a messy knot. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, the one she used to sleep in when we first got married. A desperate gesture, I thought. Without saying a word, I grabbed my own cup and sat across from her. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy like the air before a storm. I want to suggest something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of coffee. Go on? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. I think we should go to marriage counseling. I chuckled under my breath, shaking my head. Counseling? Right. Because sitting in a room with a stranger is going to fix the fact that you slept with someone else. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down this time. She stayed steady, as if she had rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times before bringing it to me. I know how it sounds, she said, her voice firmer now. But I'm serious. I've already looked up a few places. There's one that specializes in infidelity recovery. They've helped couples who've been through worse than us. Worse? I scoffed. Emily, what's worse than this? Should I be grateful you didn't run off with him? She flinched, but she kept going. I know you're angry. I know you don't believe me when I say I want to fix this. But if there's even a small part of you that still cares about us, just consider it. I didn't answer right away. I let her words hang in the air, tasting their desperation, their plea for mercy. Part of me wanted to say yes, to give her this chance and see if we could be repaired. But the other part of me, the part still reeling from the betrayal, wasn't ready to forgive, let alone work toward rebuilding anything. After a long pause, I set my cup down and leaned back in my chair. You want to fix this? Fine, but not through counseling. We'll do this my way. Emily blinked, confused. What do you mean? I mean, you're going to show me exactly how committed you are to making this work. My tone was cold, calculated. You're going to cut off all contact with Nathan. No gym, no Pilates, no texting him. Nothing. And I want proof that it's over. She nodded quickly, like she was expecting this. I already deleted his number. Not good enough, I said, leaning forward. I want you to call him. Right now. Tell him it's over and that he's never to contact you again. Put it on speaker. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. She found his name, Nathan Pilates, and tapped it. The ringing felt like thunder in the quiet kitchen. When he picked up, his voice was groggy, probably still in bed, probably replaying the same events that haunted me. "Emily," he said, "is everything okay?" Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to speak. "No, Nathan. It's not. Whatever we had, it's over. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't come near me. We're done." Silence on the other end. "Then, is he making you do this?" I snatched the phone out of her hand before she could answer. "You're damn right I am," I said, my voice low and menacing. "And if you ever come near my wife again, I'll make sure you regret it. Understand?" Nathan didn't respond, but I didn't need him to. I hung up and tossed the phone back onto the table, where it slid across the surface and stopped near her cup. Emily was crying now, her shoulders shaking as she covered her face with her hands. Normally, I would have reached out, held her, told her it would be okay. But not this time. I wasn't ready to comfort her. "Is that what you wanted?" She choked out between sobs. "Does this make you feel better?" "No," I admitted, "but it's a start." I stood, grabbed my jacket from the chair, and headed for the door. I had meetings today, deals to close, employees to manage. Life didn't pause just because my marriage was crumbling. As I stepped outside, I realized something unsettling. I didn't feel satisfied. I thought hearing her cut Nathan off would give me some sense of closure, some small victory. But instead, it left me empty, like I had just won a battle in a war I didn't want to fight anymore. And that scared me more than anything. Work was supposed to be a distraction, but it wasn't. I spent most of the day staring at spreadsheets, pretending to care about quarterly profits and market forecasts. My assistant, Jenny, popped in every hour or so, asking if I needed anything, coffee, lunch, a break, but I waved her off every time. The only thing I needed was peace, and I wasn't going to find it here. By the time the clock hit 5 p.m., I had given up on the idea of productivity. I grabbed my briefcase, muttered a quick goodbye to Jenny, and headed home, bracing myself for another awkward evening with Emily. But when I pulled into the driveway, something unexpected caught my eye. A familiar car was parked at the curb, a sleek black sedan that I hadn't seen in years. My heart dropped, and for a moment I considered turning around and driving away. But curiosity got the better of me. I parked, stepped out, and approached the front door, my pulse racing. When I walked inside, the smell of lavender was gone, replaced by the faint scent of expensive cologne. I followed it to the living room, where Emily sat on the couch, her face pale, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. Across from her, sitting in one of the armchairs like he owned the place, was Nathan. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "What the hell is this?" Nathan stood, smoothing out the front of his shirt like he hadn't just violated my home. "I came to talk." "Talk?" My voice was venomous. "After the phone call this morning, you think showing up here uninvited is a good idea?" Emily jumped to her feet, placing herself between us like she was afraid I'd lunge at him. "I didn't invite him," she said quickly. "He just showed up." My fists clenched at my sides, the urge to knock him out nearly overwhelming. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself before I throw you out." Nathan sighed, like he was tired of dealing with me. "I didn't come here to fight. I came because Emily deserves the truth." I narrowed my eyes. "The truth about what?" He looked at Emily, then back at me. "About why this happened." I laughed bitterly. "I already know why. She felt neglected. You made her feel special. End of story." Nathan shook his head. "No, that's not the whole story. Emily didn't tell you everything." I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. "What didn't you tell me, Emily?" Her face crumpled, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already have." I took a step closer, my voice low and dangerous. "Hurt me? You're telling me there's more?" Nathan stepped forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. "You've said enough. Emily, talk." She swallowed hard, her gaze darting between Nathan and me. "It wasn't just about feeling neglected," she whispered. "I was scared, Daniel. Scared that you didn't love me anymore." I scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "No, it's not." Nathan interjected. You didn't see what I saw. She was drowning, and you didn't notice? I ignored him, focusing solely on Emily. So your solution was to sleep with him? I didn't want it to go that far, she said, her voice cracking. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. But once it started, I couldn't stop. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room. Why now, Nathan? Why come here and say all this? What's your angle? Nathan sighed. I'm leaving town. I got offered a job out of state, and I took it. But I couldn't leave without making sure you knew the full story. Why do you care? I asked, my voice sharp. Because I did care about her, he admitted. But I know this isn't where she belongs. She belongs with you. The room went silent, the weight of his words hanging between us. I didn't know whether to thank him or punch him in the face. He was right. Emily didn't belong with him. But did she still belong with me? Nathan grabbed his jacket from the armchair and headed toward the door. I'm sorry, he said before leaving. For everything. When the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Emily was still standing there, tears streaming down her face, waiting for me to decide what came next. You didn't tell me because you thought I'd leave you, I said, my voice softer now. She nodded. I know I messed up, but I didn't want to lose you, Daniel. I still don't. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. I need time, I said, more to myself than to her. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily, but I'm not ready to walk away just yet. Her eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. That's all I need. But as I walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room, one thought kept circling in my mind. What if time wasn't enough? What if I couldn't find my way back to the man who used to love her without question? I didn't know the answer. Not yet. The next few days passed like a blur, each one bleeding into the next. Emily tried to stay out of my way, tiptoeing around the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to explode again, or if she was simply trying to give me space. Either way, the silence between us was suffocating. I buried myself in work, leaving early and coming home late to avoid long conversations. The guest room had become my sanctuary, a place where I didn't have to see her face or hear her apologies. But even in that quiet space, my thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. Late one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I finally caved. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through her social media. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know if there were signs I had missed. Photos of us smiling at family events, vacation pictures, and posts about her Pilates progress all stared back at me. Everything looked normal on the surface, but now I knew better. Behind every smile was a woman struggling with doubts she hadn't shared. I was about to put the phone down when a notification popped up. It was an email alert, one of my account security measures that notified me whenever new devices logged into our shared accounts. New login detected on a shared device. Location, local. The timing was suspicious, and my gut twisted. I immediately opened the app linked to our shared data, scanning for any unusual activity. And then there was Emily had logged into her email from the desktop computer downstairs. She was up at 2 a.m. checking something. My mind jumped to conclusions, wondering if she was contacting Nathan or covering her tracks. I threw on a shirt and stormed down the stairs, fueled by paranoia and exhaustion. The faint glow of the computer screen illuminated the dark room as I entered. Emily jumped when she saw me standing in the doorway. Daniel, she said, her voice shaky. What are you doing up? I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. She closed the browser tab quickly, but not before I caught a glimpse of what she had been looking at. An article titled How to Rebuild Trust After Infidelity. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Is this what you've been doing? Reading self-help articles? She nodded, her fingers still resting on the keyboard. I couldn't sleep. I've been trying to find ways to fix us. I walked over, leaning against the desk as I looked at her. And what have you learned so far? That it's not going to be easy, she admitted. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just don't know if you are. Her words stung, not because they were meant to hurt me, but because they were true. She was right. I didn't know if I was willing to do the hard work of forgiving her. Trust was fragile, and once broken, it didn't just snap back into place. I don't trust you, I said, my voice raw. And I don't know if I ever will. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears. I know. I could see the weight of my words pressing down on her, but she didn't break. She just sat there, waiting for me to say more, waiting for some sign that I wasn't done with us yet. I've been thinking, I continued, about what Nathan said, about how you felt invisible. She looked away, ashamed. I never wanted you to feel responsible for that. But I am, aren't I? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I ignored the signs. I let us drift apart. But you could have told me. You could have said something before it got to this point. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I hate myself for not saying something sooner. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the computer was the only sound in the room, a reminder that time wasn't going to pause and wait for us to figure this out. I'm going to give you a chance, I said finally, but it's going to be on my terms. She wiped her eyes, nodding quickly. Anything. I'm moving back into the bedroom, I continued. Not because I forgive you, but because we need to start somewhere. And I need to see if we can even share the same space without falling apart. Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. Okay. And no more secrets, I added. I want full transparency. If you're feeling disconnected again, you tell me. If you're struggling, you tell me. No more bottling things up. I promise, she said, her voice steady. I stood and walked toward the door, pausing just long enough to look back at her. We're not okay, Emily, but I'm willing to see if we can be. Her breath hitched, and she gave me a small nod. That's all I need. As I climbed the stairs back to the bedroom I hadn't set foot in since the night I caught her with Nathan, I realized that this wasn't just about rebuilding trust in her. It was about rebuilding trust in myself, in my ability to see the signs and confront them before it was too late. I didn't know if we'd make it, but for the first time since that night, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a shot. Morning light filtered through the blinds as I woke, the warmth of a new day touching my face. Emily lay beside me, her breathing soft and steady. For the first time in days, the tension between us felt lighter, as if the night had washed away some of the heaviness. She stirred, opening her eyes to find me watching her. You're still here, she whispered, as if she wasn't sure whether I'd stayed out of obligation or choice. I am, I replied. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than either of us could fully understand. We sat in silence for a moment before I spoke again. This isn't forgiveness, I warned, my voice steady. It's a chance. I know, she said, squeezing my hand gently. And I won't waste it. I didn't know if I believed her. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But as I sat there, holding her hand in the soft morning glow, I realized that maybe this was the first step. Not a grand gesture, not a perfect resolution, just two people trying. For now, that was enough.